small town or a big city. Hear Granville Hicks, Charles Jackson, Jinx Falkenburg, and Tex McCrary. Hear both sides on Town Meeting Tonight.
From the General Electric Television Studios of station WRGB, America's Town Meeting of the Air welcomes you to a special Christmas program dedicated to the American family. Would you rather live in a small town or a big city? While 213 stations affiliated with the American Broadcasting Company are presenting this program to millions of families throughout the land, and shortwave stations are carrying it beyond the seas, we are experimenting with a new type of production designed to bring you the images as well as the voices of the participants in our nationwide town meeting. Here in the glare of floodlights with free moving cameras and all the equipment necessary for a television broadcast, this 454th session of America's most popular radio forum will be witnessed by several thousand owners of television sets. To preside over our discussion, here is the founder and moderator of America's Town Meeting and president of Town Hall, New York, Mr. George B. Denny, Jr. Mr. Denny.
Good evening, neighbors. This being the time of year when most families are together, we decided to give you a program on a topic that is so widely discussed by so many American families. Long before the advent of the atomic bomb, which set so many city dwellers thinking about moving to the country, individuals and families debated the advantages and disadvantages of city, small town, or country life. Even the ancient Greeks debated the subject, and the Elizabethans of Shakespeare's day discussed it around their firesides, and the poets used it as themes for their poems. Henry Thoreau, in 1845, left the bustling city of Concord, Massachusetts, with nearly 2,000 inhabitants, for the seclusion of Walden Pond, where he wrote his great American classic. My good friend Carl Sandburg, who is now raising goats in western North Carolina, gained national fame with his great poem, Chicago, written some 20-odd years ago. So, Mr. Hicks and Mr. Jackson, this is an important and honorable question we are asking you to debate tonight, and I'm sure that Tex and Jinx and this representative American audience will keep you both on your mettle. And, Mr. Hicks, let me warn you, if you get too rough with the city, you're likely to hear from our listeners in New York, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Chicago, Denver, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and all the big cities, because some of these people just like to live there. And, Mr. Jackson, if you don't think our small town listeners in New England, the Middle West, the Deep South, and the Far West are loyal to their way of life, well, you should read some of our radio mail. And incidentally, by big cities, we mean cities of 500,000 or more, and by small towns, we mean towns of 10,000 or less. So let's hear first from Granville Hicks, resident of Grafton, New York, population 850, author of a celebrated new book called Small Town, Mr. Granville Hicks.
I'm all for the small town. The small town isn't perfect, any more than the big city is wholly bad. But after you've admitted that there's good and bad on both sides, the question still remains, where can the better life be led? In the small town or in the city? Like so many important questions, that has to be answered by each individual in terms of what he is and what he wants to be. For myself, the answer is easy. I have lived in a small town for the past 10 years. I hope I can go on being a small towner for the rest of my life. To begin with, I like the physical setting of my life. I hate city noise, city dirt, and city crowds. Whenever I am in New York City, I wonder how people can live without quietness and without clean, fresh air. I wonder, too, how they can stand the pressure of anonymous humanity. I like people when I know them as individual human beings. I don't like the bitter faces and the sharp elbows in the subways. Where we live, there is just one house in sight, and even that is hidden by the leaves in the summer. I look out of my study window at sky and mountains and trees. Some of them trees that I had planted and that I have taken care of myself. When a car goes by on our road, it's an event, and we usually try to find out whose car it is. No, Mr. Jackson can have the city. I like to have direct dealings with the weather. I like to dress as I please, and that isn't the way I have to dress in the city. I'd rather chop wood or shovel snow than go through physical exercises in some gymnasium or play squash at some club. I'm no farmer, but I'd be sorry not to have a garden. But that isn't all there is to living in a small town. As I said, I like people when I am aware of them as individual human beings. I'm sure that Mr. Jackson has a wide circle of friends, but I'm willing to bet that most of them have incomes and interests and habits very much like his own. In a small town, you know persons of many kinds, and you know them as individuals. Mr. Jackson, like every other city dweller, is surrounded by men and women who aren't persons to him at all, but merely functions. The elevator man, the grocer, the ward boss, and so on. Our grocer isn't just a grocer. He's also the collector of the school district, of which I am trustee. Our road superintendent isn't just the man who keeps the roads in shape. He's also a member of the fire company, as I am, and his wife is our librarian. And that's the way it goes. You can't think of people in just one single way. And so the individual human being never gets lost behind the job he does. Small town people think of the personality first and the job afterwards. That is the most important difference between a small town and a big city. A small town is a group of human beings, while a big city is an anonymous, impersonal mass. This difference affects every part of life. It is responsible for the small town's greatest virtue, which is neighborliness. If you're in trouble, whether your car won't start or your house is on fire, you can count on your neighbors. That isn't because small-town people are naturally better than city people. It's because few of us can be indifferent to the troubles of human beings we know as human beings. And in the small town, you know everybody. On the other hand, of course, the fact that everybody knows everybody else is responsible for what is supposed to be the small town's great vice, gossip. Now, gossip can be an evil thing, but up to a point it seems to me natural and not at all bad to be interested in your neighbor's affairs. And even the evil of gossip, to my mind, is more than offset by the virtue of neighborliness. I am a long way from believing that my small town or any small town is perfect, but I prefer the shortcomings of the small town to the shortcomings of the big city. Take education, for example. Knowing all that I know about the weaknesses of small-town education, I still would send a child of mine to the average country school rather than the average city school. And by the way, Mr. Jackson, do your children go to a public school? Take recreation. Most small towns do not provide proper recreational facilities for their young people, but there are tremendous natural resources, so to speak, if children and their parents will take advantage of them. Take what is called culture. I know that the arts today flourish only in the big cities, and I think that's a sad state of affairs, but we might as well be realistic and admit that the small towner can have a large share of the big city's culture for the asking. I know that the small town has its shortcomings, but I know as well that most of them can be remedied. The problems of the big cities can be solved only by specialists, and the solutions can be put into operation only by mass propaganda. The small town's problems can be solved by people like you and me if we are willing to make the effort. Small town politics can be just as corrupt as big city politics, but you, one ordinary, solitary individual, can make a tremendous difference in a small town. There is one problem that is more difficult than any other, the economic problem. For a century, the tendency in this country has been towards the centralization of industry, mass production, specialized farming. This tendency has robbed the small town of its little businesses and has taken a large part of its most energetic citizens. For decades, the American people have been in love with bigness. But today, there are signs of disillusionment, and perhaps the time has come for change. At any rate, let me say this much out of personal experience. If you can solve the economic problem, you will find the small town rich in opportunities for healthy living, for responsible and effective citizenship, and for learning about yourself and your fellow man. If you can't solve the economic problem, you may not be happy in a small town. You probably won't be. But I should like to leave a question with Mr. Jackson, who is able to skim off the cream of big city life. How would you feel, Mr. Jackson, if you had to live in a Harlem tenement or the industrial section of Pittsburgh or in the slums of any of our great cities?
Thank you, Mr. Granville Hicks. Well, you've certainly tossed a lap full of convictions into Mr. Charles Jackson's worthy hands, but I'm sure that he can handle them and toss them right back to you with equal vigor. Now we have Charles Jackson, author of Lost Weekend, and the new bestseller, The Fall of Valour, who moved from a small town to the biggest of all cities, New York City. Mr. Jackson.
After trying both a small town and a city, and on two different occasions, long enough to give each a fair trial, that is, my wife and I are now permanently sold on city living as a place to bring up our family, though we ourselves are both brought up in small towns. I think Mr. Granville Hicks' theory about the small town is all very well. It sounds idyllic, in fact, but I still think it is just a theory. Maybe I'm being unfair to him, but it seems to me that Mr. Hicks likes to think he prefers a small town, whether he likes it or not. While complaining of city noise, city dirt, and city crowds, which heaven knows are undeniable, Mr. Hicks wonders how we can stand what he calls the pressure of anonymous humanity. As for myself, I like it. When the humanity is anonymous, there is just no pressure at all, really. To coin a phrase, I think the shoe is on the other foot. That is, it seems to me that the pressure comes from your knowing your neighbors too well, and from them knowing you too well, and keeping track of your activities and what goes on in your house during your every waking hour. Mr. Hicks says, when a car goes by our road, it's an event, and we usually try to find out whose car it is. Well, we have come to prefer a different kind of event than merely a car going down our road. A real event, it seems to me, is a Friday afternoon at Town Hall, an evening at the Metropolitan, new exhibits at the art galleries, the opening of a new and interesting play, lunch or dinner with so-and-so, or the arrival in town of somebody else. As for running to the window to see whose car it is that went down our road, that seems to me to sum up the fallacy of Mr. Hicks' theory in a nutshell. Why should anybody care whose car went by your house, and why should we rush to the window to find out who it is? Life is too short, it seems to me, to bother about such parochial matters. Mr. Hicks believes that only in the country can one dress as one pleases, but that's not quite true, at least as far as I'm concerned. Indeed, it seems to me that the smaller the community, the more you have to conform in these matters. I like people as individual human beings, too, but I prefer to make my own choice. In a really small town, you have no choice. You take what you get. In a large city, you don't have to associate with other people if you don't. There is bigotry and intolerance in the city as well as in the country, but at least in the city, you don't have to put up with it. You can find those friends with whom you are sympathetic for interesting evenings of social and intellectual exchange,